Hey guys, so I decided to do a bit of content on Heads Up PLO. So this is going to be an introductory video. I noticed there are not many resources out there for this format, and there's been quite a bit of resurgence in this format lately because of the lockdown and the Galfon challenge. I also been putting some volume into that, so I might want to analyze some hands in the future. But I don't know. Either way, it's a pretty fun format that's worth talking about. First of all, some general concept about the format. The ranges are extremely wide in Heads Up PLO. Because it's Heads Up, it's wide ranges to begin with, but with PLO, now things get very, very crazy, and the equity just runs very close compared to Heads Up No Limit or any other No Limit format, because in general, PLO, the equity runs very, very close, and this is Heads Up PLO, so it runs even closer. Often it's like 51-49 or 50-50. So now there's probably less range bets being used in a lot of like the single race pots, and we're mostly looking at some bigger polarized sizing and higher checking frequency, given how the in position raiser in single race pot doesn't have that big of an equity advantage anymore. Another thing that's interesting about this game that it's a stark difference with No Limit and Heads Up No Limit especially is the procedure we use in randomization. While they're still mixing within the specific combos, right now we can just use the side card to make our decisions and do the mixing. So maybe a certain hand string for hand category, like 2 pair on a certain board is like 77% bet on this board. Now we can, and it's supposed to be a mix, now we can look at the other 2 cards out of our 4 that are the side cards, and the card removal effects or extra equity they might give you might change our decision. So it's easier to randomize using this process rather than just using our RNG generator. And of course, this process is the format is not very not as solved as No Limit, so there's more variables, and as a result we expect the population to also play quite a bit off optimal, especially there's going to be a decent amount of recreational playing PLO in general. And there are a lot of exploitative adjustments, like with over c-betting, with not donking enough, with all kind of mistakes on the turn and river. These things can lead to a lot of very profitable situations. So let's talk about some pre-flop basics. So the strategy that I'm going to recommend we use for Heads Up PLO is a polar strategy, which is raising only, with not a lot of limping, maybe just no limping. And even in the Galfon challenge, I didn't see a lot of limp at this stack depth. You can definitely have the limp strategy, but I think it's easier to implement just a raise only strategy at around 85% of hands or more. We can play so many hands in position because equity is close and position advantage is very strong. And against a weak opponent who don't free bet enough or play poorly post flop, we can even, go up to putting every hand. And as you can see, we're folding not just 9% to the free bet, which is a very low fold to free bet percentage. And that's because we have, decent amount of equity in this game, regardless of our holdings. So we can defend quite wide in position, and we're also 4-betting just 7%. And we always want to use the pot sizing when we open to maximize the money we put in, given we still have this advantage at reasonably high SPR. So for a big blind, they'll be calling around 50% of hands, and they'll be trying to free bet to pot, which is only 9 big blinds, and for 18% of the time, and we should look at some hand combos with pre-flop strategy. So with the button, there are some pre-flop basics that we can think about, because there's so many hand combos in PLO, we don't exactly have a big, massive hand chart to refer to, but there are hand charts, and I have some of them, but it's quite a lot of stuff, and this would just give you a quick guideline to kind of understand the combos on your own. So let's start with the type of hands that we can have. So firstly, we can have double suited hands, which are, maybe 2 spades, 2 hearts, and those hands we can basically always open, almost 100%. We can just go ahead and open 100% and defend all of them against free bet, because they just play very well in position. They got a lot of equity, they got 2 flush draws, so they're really good board coverage, and we can even 4-bet around 18 to 20% of them. With a lot of those, something like ace, queen, h6, that was suited, that might be one of the weaker hands we 4-bet, and we can also 4-bet hands like 10s plus with the ace blocker, which blocks their aces. So yeah, it's quite a lot of hands that we can 4-bet also. So when our hand's just single suited, which is 1 flush draw, we're only opening 90% of them, but that's still a lot. You can go ahead and open almost all of them, especially if your opponent's weak. And we are supposed to, in theory, fold some hands, like king 8-4 deuce, because it has 2 wheel cards, the 4 and the deuce, and generally low cards play quite poorly in this game. We want the higher cards, so we can definitely fold a bit of them if we're playing near optimal. So after opening, we are rarely folding to free bet, except for like literally our worst opens, like king 10-7 deuce with only a 10 high flush draw and a weak wheel card in the deuce, and it's very disconnected too. But in general, we are rarely folding to a free bet, and mostly continuing around 90% again. And we're 4-betting some of our Broadway pairs with the unsuited ace blocker. So ace, queen, queen, ace blocking the aces. So now we go down to triple suited hands, which are slightly worse than single suited hands because they have an extra like 3 diamonds. They have an extra diamond which blocks our own flush outs, so now we have less outs, and it's as such it plays slightly worse. And again, we use the same kind of principle with folding disconnected ones with multiple low cards. Here 5-4-3 in the ace 5-4-3 is quite connected, but it's also very low, so it's a hand that we can definitely fold. And again, we are rarely folding to free bet because we are reasonably slightly selective with the hands we open, so we are also just folding our worst opens. And this time we're just 4-betting our aces when we open triple suited hands. So with our monotone hands, now we're opening even less because it's 4 of the suit, so now we're really blocking ourselves from getting the flush. So let's say 4 hearts, we're definitely not opening as much, we're only opening 70%, and we're folding really disconnected ones, ones with multiple wheel cards against, like Jack 10 5-4, it's quite disconnected. Jack 10 is connected, but not really, it's not free card connected. So we're only going to be opening 70% of monotone hands. And we are folding quite a lot of them to free bets now. We're folding like 30%, which are significant, and it's with the disconnected ones. And because it's monotone, we'll never have a pair, because they're all the same suit, therefore we won't really have an aces to 4-bet. So now we're looking at rainbow hands. They're opening slightly less than the monotone hands, 65, 63 roughly, 63 to 65% of rainbow hands. And same criteria, we're folding disconnected ones We're looking to fold them when they have a wheel in them, like a low card. And we're folding quite a lot to 3-bets now, like almost half, which is like 40%. Even disconnected ones like ace queen 8-3, which might look, you know, the ace queen might look reasonable, but it should be folding. Even some paired ones like like king 10 5-5 end up folding. And now we're just folding the aces, which we do have pairs of. And now looking at the big blind, we are rarely folding double suited hands because, as we said before, double suited hands have just played very well post flop in wide ranges, even narrower ranges. And we're free betting basically half of them if we don't have a pair. You're looking at hands like even ace king 7 deuce with the nut flush, the nut suit, and that's quite disconnected. And we're still free betting some of these hands. Some of these are our worst free bets. But when we have a pocket, we're free betting up to 65% because our hand's just much stronger now. And when we have 2 pockets, that's when our hand's really strong. We can make 2 sets, we can, you know, cover 2 flush boards. We are definitely always free betting them. You can pretty much just always free bet double pockets, which are also double suited. And with single suited hands, when it's unpaired, we're folding 40% of them to a raise, especially the ones with a lot of low cards like 5-4-3 deuce, which looks really connected but doesn't really play that well. And we're free betting a better ones with the nut suit like ace jack 9-7. We generally want to look for connectivity and nut suits when constructing our free bets. And when we have a single pocket, we can make a set. We start to defend a lot more, only folding the worst ones and looking for high pockets or the nut suit to free bet when we have a pocket. And when we have double pockets, again, we always free betting because that's a strong hand. Making 2 sets, making, you know, covering a flush board. We want to push our equity. So now, with unpaired triple suited hands, they're slightly worse than single suited hands because of the blocking their own outs with the flush. And this time we voting near 40%, but we're looking to just free bet with the high pairs, the premium kind of pairs, which, you know, it's very intuitive. Now we're folding even more with monotone hands because they are even weaker. They block their own flush outs even more. And unpaired rainbow hands, we're folding most of them 75%. And when we have a pocket pair with it, we fold only 50%. Still, even with a pocket pair, we still fold half of it if it doesn't have any flush possibility to go with it. And we're just looking to free bet just the aces or double pockets. So I'll be doing just 10 examples with the pre-flop basics. So with this hand, we're triple suited, and even though we have the deuce wheel card, our other cards are quite high, and this hand is strong enough to open. With this hand, we're facing a 3-bet and we're rainbow, but with ace king 10, which are quite strong, I think that's enough for us to defend against a 3-bet. With this hand, we're facing an open and we have the nut suit, but we're triple suited and our pair is quite low, so we'll just be calling. With this hand, we're facing an open, and with the king, queen 9, which are quite strong, and the single suit, even though we have the deuce, I think we can defend. With this hand, we're facing a 4-bet. We're single suited, but our cards are somewhat connected, and I think we can defend against the 4-bet. With this hand, we're facing the 3-bet, and we're single suited with a low pair. I think that we are not folding that many single suited hands, and with a pair, we can definitely defend this hand. Against an open, we have double suited jacks, and I think that's strong enough to free bet, even though the deuce and the 5 are low. With this hand, we are single suited, and we have a low wheel card, but it's also quite disconnected, so I think that this combo is actually a fold. With this hand, we are facing an open, but we are single suited, and we got some high cards with the king and the 10 and the 7. Even though it's quite disconnected, I think we will call this. With this hand, we're facing a 4-bet, but we got a strong suit and the ace blocker, which block aces from their range. I think that with the jacks here, we can defend. So the general concept we want to be looking at in single raise pot when we're in position after raising and getting called is, first of all, the range versus range equity is very close. It runs almost 50-50, even for really strong boards like ace king x, it's like 51-49, which is pretty surprising because in heads up no limit, the equity discrepancy would be way bigger. But in PLO, given there's so many hands that can hit so many boards in different way, the equity always runs close, is always around 50-50, which means I recommend that in position plays a 75% pot or check strategy at around mid frequency or slightly less than mid frequency. So that looks quite like a polarized sizing if you were to compare it to betting strategies in no limit. And one thing to keep in mind is that the population generally don't donk enough, which means their check range still contains a lot of nutted hands. They're less capped than when they have a donking range, which this will further drive our frequency down. And that's very important to understand. So we're sometimes going even lower than the 45 to 50% range in terms of frequency. And another thing is the sizing goes down to 50% to just half pot on straight boards, and the frequency goes down along with it because now our hands aren't as strong because straights are possible, and it goes further down on really locked down boards like paired or monotone boards to just a third pot. And on monotone boards, the frequency can go quite low with the flushes in play, but it goes higher than you expect on paired boards, which is a bit more intuitive actually. It's more like Hold'em, where there's quite a reasonable betting frequency on paired boards, and yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And as I said, the population don't donk enough, which brings the c-bet frequency down, and also they also tend to c-bet way too much, which kind of incentivize us to not donk bet as much too, even though donking is quite plus EV still with a lot of hands. So yeah, these are just some mistakes that populations tend to make, especially with so many combo. It's hard for people to construct well-defined strategies, and they're more likely to make mistakes as a result. And one thing is, when we deciding whether to c-bet or play a specific combo in certain ways, they're very important factors like equity boosters, blockers, future blockers, and whether our hands have just hopeless side cards or showdown. And these may bring our betting frequency up of the individual combos. That's something we're going to look at. So one thing about side cards, as I said, instead of using an RNG software to do our mixing, we can use sidecard properties to decide how to mix our two pairs, our over pairs. In terms of percentage, we can use the sidecards to do it for us, which makes this game in a way far more intuitive and clean of a game than Hold'em. While even though with specific with specific side cards like 2 backdoor flush draws, there still might be further mixing, but you know, we're just never going to get everything exactly correct. And I think for people just coming into the game, you can just use the side cards to do the mixing, to make your decision. I think that's good enough. And another thing another thing that we look at comes down to fundamentally that the EV of betting our hands is proportional to a few different factors. For example, can we stand a check raise? So that's proportional to our EV of our hands in the check raise lines. And having equity boosters like flush draw, straight draw, backdoor flush draw, whether it's 1 or 2, backdoor straight draw to go with our overpair or top pair or 2 pair, that definitely increase our EV in playing those hands when the pot's bloated, because we have more equity, with more better turn cards and playability, so we can stand check raise, we can stand bloated pots. And the same thing is with those blockers, you know, the future blockers, like blocking the nut flush blocker that comes in the future, blocking the backdoor nut flush that comes in the future, or, you know, or second nut flush. You should have been saying second nut flush and backdoor nut flush blocker, backdoor second nut flush blocker, and blocking the continue range, like blocking any flush draw in play, blocking the sets, blocking hands that might raise us. So there's definitely the two things we need to look at is blockers and equity. And if we don't have enough extra equity from those side cards, we definitely need more blockers to increase the EV of playing our hand as a bet and justify in betting. So another thing that our EV of our bet is inversely proportional to our combos when we check back. So some hands, they don't play well when they're checked back. They don't play well in delayed lines. And for example, maybe they have really junky side cards, they're really low showdown or low playability in future streets. And that will bring increase our incentive to bet the hands and just get a quick fold right away, because they can't really play well if it's checked back. They might be forced to check fold, they might be forced to fold to turn probes. So yeah, that's also another consideration. So in general, I'm just going to give you a general overview in how we play different hand strength. We have very strong hands. We tend to pick a linear approach, where the more equity we have with our overpairs, 2 pairs, with our sets, that will increase our betting frequency. So for obvious reasons, our sets or our 2 pairs with good backup like a flush draw, those are definitely betting a high frequency because they're generally going to be ahead, they're generally going to have a lot of equity, and our frequency can go high. And when our 2 pair don't have any backup, we have to start looking at the side cards and see, does it give us any backdoors, does it give us any blockers to their continuing range, like blocking flush draw or blocking strong hands. That will basically affect our decision in whether we want to bet the hand. And also, you know, obviously reasons, top 2 does better than bottom 2 against a check raise or bloated pot, and it has more equity, so we're definitely going to be preferring to bet top 2 more. And there's this similar idea extends to overpairs and top pairs, which having a backup will greatly increase their betting frequency. Otherwise, we need to look for blockers or other reason, like having low EV in the check to justify betting. And you know, second pair is similar to top pair in that we're also using the same principle, looking for backup or blockers or equity, but we are betting middle pair, second pair more because of the word showdown. So we, you know, inherently it's lower EV in terms of check back, so we just want to win the hand right away. So we definitely have a higher betting frequency with those categories of hands, which, you know, is counterintuitive to heads up NL. You know, I guess in some ways, in some situation heads up NL, there's similar concepts, but you know, in general, there's quite a merged looking, you know, betting strategy that we're seeing. even though it's too simple to just say it's merge. And then when we look at our bluff, obviously we're trying to find a high equity hand like wrap, a flush draw. Those hands aren't, you can't even really quantify them as bluff in this format. There's some sort of very strong semi bluffs. The nut flush draw, second nut flush draw, betting at high frequency. Whereas the weakest, weaker draws like open and straight draw, gut shot, weak flush draws, they're checking a lot more. They're checking a higher percentage because they want to realize equity. They don't want to get check raised off the hands and off the equity. So you see a lot of, more checking with those hands, which could be anything up to, 50% with bare gut shots, checking bare gut shots, and, checking quite a lot of weak, medium flush draws, sometimes even more than 50%, because we're happy to just realize our equity. So again, same principle with these, these bluffs. We're trying to look for equity boosters, blockers, hopeless side card. So something like medium flush draws with free flush cards. So let's say there's two clubs on the board and we have 3 clubs in our hand. That makes it more hopeless of a hand because it brings down its, ironically it brings down its equity, but that makes it more of a reason, ironically that makes it more of a reason to bet because our hand is now just more hopeless, doing worse in checkbacks, less showdown, less chance to win, so we just want to bet it right away. So that's something to think about. And something like a bare backdoor nut flush blocker, bare backdoor second nut flush blocker with nothing else going for them, no draws. Those are hands, air hands that can bet at extremely high frequency because when the flush gets there, you have a combo that completely bricks and just has the nut flush draw that just goes bet, bet, bet. So that's something to think about. That would bet at very high frequency actually. You can almost pure bet them. And yeah, these are just some of the hand strength some of the thought process that we want to have when playing a few of these certain hand strength buckets. So I'm just going to be doing some C betting examples here. So with this board we have top and bottom pair with their ace free for both of these hands. But the difference is that this hand has the ace of hearts, which blocks the nut flush when it comes in, and also we have a backdoor flush draw with the 10-9 of spades. So this makes all the difference in the hand because with the ace of hearts we can barrel flush runouts as a bluff with our hand in certain situations. So because of the blocker effect and the extra equity with the backdoor flush draw, we are definitely preferring to bet this 2-pair with the ace of hearts rather than that 2-pair. In terms of selecting a C betting candidate, it's a better C betting candidate. With this board, we have very similar hands again, but notice the difference is that with this 10s at the top, we have the 10 of spades, which they're both of the 10s, they're blocking future straight runouts, but this 10 of spades, it also blocks certain flush runouts, the straight flush in the future, so or any blocking straight flush draws right now. So this 10 of spades is much stronger than the 6 of spades as in terms of card removal effects. Also this one has the extra backdoor flush draw with the hearts. So this combination will be preferred as a C betting bluff candidate compared to this one when we have the 10 of spades. Looking at the game plan when we're just using the big sizing below these boards and we're not betting very high frequency, whereas in Hold'em you see a lot of super high frequency bets for very small sizing. This will make our strategy range, this will make our range split early in the tree, and things get less simple when we're checking both a high percentage and betting a reasonable percentage. So one thing to think about is how to allocate all the hand strength buckets that I just mentioned recently, just above, into these different different kind of lines. So all the different hand strength that I just mentioned, the 2-pair sets, top pair, mid pair, over pair, variety of bluffs and draws. We have to think about how to allocate them into bet line, the bet check line, the bet check call line, bet check back, and I guess full river. So that's along with the bet check call line, and all these other lines, like how delayed line, delay and barrel, or double delay where we check bet. He goes check 2 streets, then we bet, and various check raise lines. So we need to think about how to allocate all the combos into all these tree branches, and this is definitely not as easy to do as in No Limit, where you can really count the combos easily, but there are hundreds of thousands of combo in HUPLO, so yeah, it's definitely not an easy task, even though the ranges are quite merged. If you're coming from a No Limit perspective, you're seeing that I'm betting everything, all these draws, all these mid pairs, top pairs, everything's being betted, nuts being betted. But the thinking we should have is that the sizing we're using is actually quite polarized, so we can't look at HUPLO purely through the lenses of absolute hand strength, like strong, nutted hands, second pair, third pair, top pair, draws. Like we should categorize hand based on their EV, the combos, like how well they play, how much equity they have, how much card removal they have. So fundamentally, we're still looking through these kind of like polarized thought process of with a polarized game plan of betting good stuff, betting the really junky stuff, which is low EV in checking, and while checking the medium stuff that are quite good but not that good, but not that bad either. So yeah, this is kind of like a paradigm shift that you have to have in your thinking for this format. And check raising is also a very complicated concept, but there are certain things we can look for to make our decisions. Again, it's with the side card. Something to think about is avoid check raising too much when the SPR is very high, and the same thing on draw heavy boards where the texture change quite a lot, and this can favor positional advantage quite a lot. So we just have to try to think about what the optimal frequencies would be. And same thing when estimating or trying to approximate optimal play, we're looking at the same criteria, looking at the blockers, looking at the the equity, all the draws and backdoors and pairs, and again, some of those hands have both blockers and equity, because when you have a pair, you're also blocking a set, so you have more equity and more blocker. Same thing with draws, you're blocking their draws. And we also look at playability of the hands with backdoors, and which again is this linked with blockers and equity. So it's quite intuitive. It's we're just thinking about hands that can give us a lot of good turn situations to barrel, which is similar to Hold'em. And when we have multiple blockers, multiple equity boosters, or reasons that improve our playability, this can overall boost our equity, and it can also lead to an effect called blocker stacking, where with multiple blockers in our 4 cards, and the more blockers, the more equity we have, the more that brings up the frequencies. And one thing is that the population tend to not stack enough reasons or blockers, so that might lead to them check raising hands that shouldn't be check raised and that often. With this board, we're looking at what hands that might make sense to check raise, and these are some potential candidate hands that we can check raise. And on Queen A4, with the 2 hearts, first we look at the combo with the Ace of Hearts, A7, 7-5. We have a gut shot. We also don't have that much showdown value and playability, and having the 7s Pocket of sevens also reduce our equity by a bit overall, which makes it a candidate to actually be used as a check raise bluff combo, along with the ace of hearts, which is a really strong combo, a strong blocker to have to bluff, because we can bluff future flush runouts, and we can bluff some future straight runouts, or the sevens might end up blocking some straight. And also we have the two spades with the 7-5 spades, which in turn, which is a backdoor flush draw, which gives us extra equity. So for many of the reasons you see in terms of equity and blockers and showdown value, this is a good combo to check raise bluff at some reasonable frequency. And with this one, we have the reasonable flush draw, but with the pocket freeze, which weakens is both showdown value and both chance to, in terms of playability later in the street. So this is also a hand that we can just use as potentially check raise bluffing candidate at some frequency. And also the pocket freeze can, just like the sevens, it can turn into a set, and that might give it a bit of extra equity, which also can be useful to barrel some turns. And with the last hand combination, we have actually top pair, and it's kind of like a mergy sort of bluff-like kind of hand, but really we're using it because of the Queen of Hearts is very useful. It's blocking their flush draws, and we cover some flush runouts that we might continue barreling on. With the jacks, again, similar effect with the other pockets, it's lowering our playability, but it's also at the same time giving us justification to check raise as a bluff, and the jacks can end up hard blocking in straight run out in the future. And of course with the jack 9, queen 9, we got the with the jack 9 especially, we got the gut shot, which is also reasonable for the hand, and along with the backdoor flush draws. So there's many reasons to see why these hands can barrel. And notice how in these examples, just specifically these examples, well, with these examples they all have pockets which can turn into sets, which is reasonably useful. But the thing that we keep seeing with all these examples is that we are stacking blocker effects and card removal effects. Well, that's blocker effects, but we're also stacking equity and different reason like low showdown to be turning our hands into check raises. And the final thing we can look at is how we play free bet pots out of position. I'm not going to go into that detail with this, but in general, what you can see, we use the 3/4 sizing for most unpaired boards as our default sizing. Although you can use half pot or lower, but I'm just recommending this as a default strategy for now, and it's quite simple. And for those straight, paired, or monotone boards, we scale it down to 33%, which is 1/3 pot. And one thing is, I kind of made a graph of how these different textures belong on these, how these different textures lead to different sort of c-betting frequencies. And one thing we notice is that the height of the high card, that the higher it is, the higher the c-bet frequency is, and that makes that a lot of sense. It's quite intuitive because we're free betting a lot of the strong aces kind of hand, the strong pairs, so that's going to tend to hit the high boards more, right? We're free betting more high cards, more strong heavy cards, so that hits all the heavy boards more. As you can see, all those big boards, like the ace high, king highs, those are quite high frequency. They're often over 50%. And it slowly goes down as we go down to queen high, jack high, and 10 high. See, it's slightly going down, and it's going down even more when the board is rags. So that individually, even within a certain board like ace high, as you can see, something like ace 7-3, ace 5-4, which makes a straight 2, ace 6-5, those have lower c-betting frequency than something like ace king 9, ace king queen, which are almost like 100% c-betting frequency. So having small side cards, like your small middle pair card, small third pair card, that also brings the frequency down because it's now hitting you not as strong. It's no longer smashing the free bet range as hard. So that also drives the frequency down. And in general, straight boards tend to drive the frequency down because straights are now possible. A lot of now your premium type hands are now even less strong. But when you make a straight on the ace, king, queen high boards, even some of the jack high boards, I guess, mostly ace, king, queen high boards, those boards are usually Broadway boards which hit the free bet range quite well. So those kind of straight boards drive the frequency up, whereas something like the wheel ace high boards and the low straight boards, that really pushes the frequency down. Looking at something like, you know, at the end there with the rag, the 5-3 deuce, 6-5-4, 7-5-4, it's almost down to 0% c betting, and we do quite bad when the board is low and the board's also straight. And on paired boards, the frequency is quite dependent on which is the pair. Like for example, king, king, 6, very high c betting frequency in the 90s, near 90%, whereas king 4-4 when the trips is low. The low cards, that drives the frequency down because now with less of, when the trips is strong, we hit it quite hard, so we have more of the strong trips. And when it's king 4-4 or like queen 6-6, jack 5-5, that really brings the frequency down because we're hitting trips less often. And with monotone, it's quite interesting. When the monotone board is high, that tends to drive the frequency down because you know, flushes are now possible, so our premium hands are less strong. Also, it blocks our high suited combos, so our frequency goes down when that happens. And when the monotone boards are on for the rag boards, and that drives the frequency up because our we still have the high strong suited hands, so we still have a lot of strong flushes as a proportion of our range, so we do better on the low monotone board, which brings our frequency up relative to other low boards. And while high monotone boards bring our frequency slightly down when we compare it to the other high boards, and those effects can stack with having straight, you know. So having straight and monotone can have different effects that adds with it. So, you know, this is just some preliminary kind of introductory analysis. If you want to be more detailed in these, you have to do independent research and, you know, do some aggregate reports so you can understand the frequencies better. So in terms of study resources that we can use in the future for if you want to look deeper into the heads up PLO rabbit hole, there are the Vision Trainer from Run At Once. Some Run At Once coaches have good videos, some Monka, Solver Sims. Jay Nandas is still one of the main PLO resources on the internet. Any content by Jay Nandas and his website. There's also Poker Juice, which has been around for a while now, and it's a very good PLO analysis tool that you can use. And Preflop Guru, which is also good, which I used earlier in the presentation, which has also used Monka Solver Sims and have different reg structure, as you see with the smaller and mid and high stakes kind of ranges.